Welcome to Week 9 of the Grant Architect course. This week focuses on advanced budgeting and strategy, building on the fundamentals we covered in Week 8. Our theme is strategic financial planning for complex grants. We begin with cost sharing, also known as match, which represents one of the most consequential and frequently misunderstood aspects of grant budgeting. Cost sharing refers to the portion of project costs not paid by the federal award. When you commit to cost sharing, you are legally obligating your organization to contribute resources beyond what the grant provides. These commitments become binding once the award is made and must be documented and reported throughout the project. Understanding cost sharing is essential because mistakes in this area create significant compliance risks. Overcommitting to match, failing to document contributions, or misvaluing in-kind contributions can result in audit findings and repayment requirements. This lesson will help you understand the types of cost sharing and when each applies, the regulatory framework governing match requirements, the risks of voluntary cost sharing, and strategies for managing cost sharing commitments responsibly. Remember that regulatory specifics discussed were accurate as of November 2025. Always verify current requirements at ecfr.gov before making cost sharing decisions. Cost sharing is the portion of total project costs that your organization contributes rather than charging to the federal award. This contribution demonstrates your organization's commitment to the project and leverages federal funds with additional resources. Various terms describe the same concept. Cost sharing, match, matching funds, and non-federal share all refer to the resources your organization provides to supplement federal funding. Some programs specify match ratios such as 1-to-1 match, meaning you provide $1 for every federal dollar. When you commit to cost sharing, you create a binding obligation. Once your award is made, the cost sharing promised in your proposal becomes a condition of the award. You must document that you actually contributed the promised resources. Failing to meet cost-sharing commitments can result in reduced payments, returned funds, or findings in audit. 2 CFR 200.306 governs cost sharing for federal grants. This regulation establishes requirements for what counts as cost sharing, how contributions must be documented, and what limitations apply. Understanding this regulation is essential for managing cost sharing responsibly. Verify the current text at ecfr.gov as requirements may have been amended since November 2025. Cost sharing falls into 3 distinct categories with different implications for your obligations. Understanding these categories helps you make appropriate decisions about what to commit. Mandatory cost sharing is required by the funding program. The funding opportunity announcement specifies that applicants must contribute a certain percentage or amount. You cannot receive the award without committing to this match. Mandatory match is a condition of funding that applies to all awardees. Voluntary committed cost sharing is not required by the funder but is offered in your proposal. Perhaps you mentioned that your organization will contribute faculty time, space, or other resources to strengthen your application. Once you include this commitment in your proposal and receive the award, it becomes binding just like mandatory match. Voluntary uncommitted cost sharing represents resources you contribute to the project but do not mention in your proposal or include in your budget. Since you never committed to these contributions, they do not create binding obligations. You can contribute additional resources without formally tracking them as cost sharing. The critical distinction is that both mandatory and voluntary committed cost sharing become binding obligations. Once you commit in your proposal, you must deliver. This is why voluntary committed cost sharing requires careful consideration. Offering match to strengthen your proposal creates real obligations. Cost sharing can take several forms, each with specific requirements for valuation and documentation. Understanding these forms helps you identify and account for your contributions properly. Cash contributions represent actual funds your organization provides to cover project costs. These are the most straightforward form of cost sharing. Your organization pays for project expenses using non-federal funds, and those expenditures count toward your match commitment. In-kind contributions are non-cash resources with measurable value. Donated goods, volunteer time, use of facilities, and equipment contributions can all count as in-kind match. However, these contributions must be properly valued according to federal standards, which we will cover in the next lesson. Third-party contributions come from partners, donors, or other external sources, rather than your own organization. A community partner might donate space for project activities. A business might contribute equipment. These contributions can count toward your match if properly documented and attributed to your project. All forms of cost sharing must meet the same standards as direct charges to the grant. Contributions must be allowable under federal cost principles, allocable to your specific project, reasonable in amount, and properly documented. You cannot count as match contributions that would be unallowable if charged directly to the grant. Federal regulations establish specific requirements that cost sharing must meet. Understanding these requirements helps you ensure your contributions actually count toward your match obligations. Cost sharing must be verifiable from your organization's records. You need documentation showing that contributions were actually made and their value. General claims of support without supporting records do not satisfy this requirement. Build documentation practices into your cost-sharing management from project start. Contributions cannot come from other federal funds. You cannot use federal grant funds to meet cost-sharing requirements on another federal grant. This prohibition prevents double counting federal resources. If you have a federal grant supporting general operations, those funds cannot be redirected to meet match requirements elsewhere. Cost sharing must be necessary and reasonable for project accomplishment. You cannot count inflated or unnecessary contributions. If you claim faculty time as match, that time should genuinely contribute to project objectives. If you claim equipment use, it should be needed for project activities. Contributions must be allowable under the terms and conditions of the federal award. If a type of cost is unallowable as a direct charge, it is also unallowable as cost sharing. The same cost principles that govern direct charges apply to match contributions. Overmatching, committing to more cost sharing than required, creates real risks that organizations should carefully consider. Understanding these risks helps you make appropriate decisions about cost sharing commitments. Competitive pressure creates temptation to offer match to strengthen proposals. When awards are competitive, organizations may believe that offering significant match demonstrates commitment and improves chances of funding. This can create a race to the bottom where applicants overcommit to win awards. Once included in your proposal, voluntary committed match becomes as binding as mandatory match. You may have offered generous match hoping to be competitive, but once awarded, you must deliver. Your organization now has legal obligations it may struggle to meet, especially over multi-year projects. All committed match creates documentation burden. Every dollar of cost sharing must be tracked, valued, documented, and reported. In-kind contributions require particularly careful documentation. The administrative effort of managing extensive cost sharing can strain organizational capacity. Shortfall consequences can be severe. If you committed to $50,000 in match but can only document $40,000, you face a shortfall. Consequences may include reduced federal payments, returned funds, or findings that affect your ability to receive future awards. The match you offered voluntarily now creates real compliance problems. Federal policy actively discourages voluntary committed cost sharing, though many applicants do not realize this. Understanding the policy context helps you make informed decisions about whether to offer match. The uniform guidance discourages voluntary committed cost sharing. This policy reflects recognition that voluntary match creates burdens for both recipients and federal agencies without necessarily improving project outcomes. The policy encourages applicants to request the resources they need rather than artificially reducing requests with match commitments. Federal agencies generally cannot require cost sharing beyond what statute mandates. If the legislation authorizing a program does not require cost sharing, the agency should not add match requirements. This limitation protects applicants from arbitrary match demands that might favor well-resourced organizations. Agencies should not use voluntary cost sharing as an evaluation criterion for making awards. Using match as a selection factor would effectively penalize organizations that cannot offer significant cost sharing, even when the policy discourages such offers. Review criteria should focus on project merit rather than organizational wealth. 42 CFR 200.306 paragraphs A and B establish these principles. Despite this policy, some programs historically have considered cost sharing in evaluations, and organizational culture sometimes encourages offering match. Know the policy and consider whether offering match truly serves your interests. Despite the risks of overmatching, cost sharing sometimes makes strategic sense. Understanding when match is appropriate helps you make good decisions about commitments. Mandatory match required by the program involves no real choice. If the funding announcement requires cost sharing, you must commit it to be eligible for funding. Your decision is whether to apply at all, not whether to offer match. The requirement applies to all applicants equally. Genuine leverage occurs when your organization would invest these resources in the project, regardless of whether you count them as match. If faculty will work on the project as part of their regular responsibilities, documenting this as match may make sense. You are not incurring additional obligations. You are documenting what would happen anyway. Strategic alignment exists when the project advances organizational priorities beyond what the grant funds. If the project builds capacity, develops infrastructure, or creates assets your organization values, contributing resources demonstrates genuine investment in outcomes that benefit you directly. Capacity to manage the commitment means you can actually document and report the cost sharing throughout the project. If you lack systems to track in-kind contributions or will struggle to meet documentation requirements, committing to extensive cost sharing is unwise regardless of your intentions. Match requirements may be expressed as percentages or ratios, and confusion between these expressions causes calculation errors. Understanding how to calculate match correctly ensures you commit appropriately. Match percentage expresses cost sharing as a percent of total project cost, not just federal funds. If a program requires 25% cost sharing, you must contribute 25% of the total budget. The federal share would be 75%. Match ratio expresses the relationship between match and federal funds. A 1-to-1 ratio means you provide $1 of match for every federal dollar. A 1-to-3 ratio means one match dollar for every 3 federal dollars. Ratios describe the relationship between the two funding sources directly. A concrete example clarifies the relationship. 25% cost sharing on a $400,000 project means $100,000 in match and $300,000 in federal funds. The ratio is 1-to-3. 50% cost sharing would mean $200,000 each, or a 1-to-1 ratio. Understanding whether the requirement is expressed as percentage or ratio is essential for accurate calculation. Some announcements specify match as a percentage of total project costs. Others specify it as a ratio of match to federal funds. Misreading the requirement produces incorrect calculations that create compliance problems. Proper documentation is essential for demonstrating that you met your cost-sharing commitments. Building documentation practices from project start prevents problems later. Contemporaneous records capture contributions when they occur rather than reconstructing them later. When faculty contribute effort, document it in real time. When partners provide resources, record the contribution immediately. Contemporaneous documentation is more credible and accurate than after-the-fact reconstruction. Source documentation provides evidence of actual expenditures or contributions. Cash cost sharing should be supported by accounting records showing the actual payments. In-kind contributions should have documentation showing what was contributed and when. Third-party contributions need letters or records from the contributing parties. Valuation support documents the basis for valuing in-kind contributions. If you claim volunteer time as match, document the rate used and why it is appropriate. If you claim donated equipment, document how you determined fair market value. Valuation methodology should be defensible if questioned. Reporting readiness prepares you for cost-sharing reports that funders require. Many federal awards require periodic reporting on cost sharing. Having organized documentation enables accurate, timely reporting. Scrambling to compile information at reporting deadlines suggests poor management and may produce incomplete reports. Common mistakes in cost sharing create compliance problems that careful attention can prevent. Learning from others' errors helps you avoid similar issues. Overpromising creates obligations your organization cannot meet. In the enthusiasm of proposal preparation, organizations sometimes commit to generous cost sharing without carefully considering whether they can deliver. When actual contributions fall short of commitments, compliance problems result. Poor documentation leaves you unable to demonstrate the contributions you actually made. Even if you genuinely provided significant cost sharing, lack of documentation means you cannot prove it. Auditors and agency reviewers require evidence, not assurances. Inadequate documentation is treated as failure to meet commitments. Incorrect valuation uses improper rates for in-kind contributions. Overvaluing contributions to meet match requirements is a compliance violation. Using rates that cannot be justified, or valuing contributions at what you wish they were worth rather than their actual value, creates audit findings. Valuation must follow federal standards. Using other federal funds as cost sharing violates the prohibition on federal to federal match. Organizations with multiple federal grants sometimes mistakenly believe they can use one grant to match another. This is prohibited. Cost sharing must come from non-federal sources. Third-party contributions from external sources can count as cost sharing but require careful management. Understanding the requirements and risks helps you handle these contributions appropriately. Third-party contributions are resources from partners, donors, community organizations, or other external sources rather than your own organization. These contributions can significantly expand your cost-sharing capacity by leveraging resources beyond your direct control. The same standards apply to third-party contributions as to your own. They must be verifiable, not from federal sources, necessary and reasonable and properly valued. The contribution must genuinely benefit your project and be documented adequately. A partner's general expression of support does not constitute verifiable cost sharing. Documentation requires records from the third parties confirming their contributions. Commitment letters at proposal stage describe what partners intend to provide. During the project, you need actual documentation showing contributions were made. This may require ongoing communication with partners to obtain timely records. Risks arise from having less control over third-party contributions. A partner who committed to providing space might face their own budget constraints. A donor who promised equipment might not deliver. Since you committed to the match based on these contributions, shortfalls from partners still create problems for you. Most organizations have policies governing cost sharing that you must follow. Understanding your institutional context helps you navigate the approval process and make appropriate commitments. Many institutions require approval before committing cost sharing in proposals. This approval process ensures that appropriate authorities review match commitments before they become binding. You may need approval from department chairs, deans, finance officers, or other administrators depending on the amount and type of cost sharing. Sponsored programs offices often manage cost sharing centrally. They track institutional match commitments, monitor cost sharing documentation, and ensure reporting requirements are met. Working with your sponsored programs office helps ensure proper management of cost sharing obligations. Policy rationale protects the institution from overcommitment. Without oversight, individual principal investigators might make match commitments that collectively exceed institutional capacity. Central review ensures that cost-sharing promises align with institutional resources and strategic priorities. Know your organization's cost-sharing policies before including match in proposals. What approvals are required? Who must sign off? What documentation will be expected? Understanding these requirements early prevents problems when you are trying to submit a proposal on deadline. Following best practices for cost sharing helps you manage match commitments successfully and avoid compliance problems. These practices should guide your approach to any project involving cost sharing. Minimize voluntary match by only committing what is truly necessary or strategically valuable. Resist competitive pressure to overcommit. Remember that federal policy discourages voluntary committed cost sharing. Before including match in your proposal, ask whether it genuinely strengthens your application enough to justify the obligations it creates. Obtain appropriate approvals before committing to cost sharing. Follow your institutional policies. Ensure that people with authority to commit organizational resources have reviewed and approved your match commitments. Last-minute additions of cost sharing without proper approval create problems. Build documentation systems from project start. Do not wait until reporting deadlines to figure out how you will track cost sharing. Establish procedures for documenting contributions contemporaneously. Assign responsibility for maintaining cost sharing records. Create templates and workflows that make documentation routine. Monitor throughout the project to verify you are on track to meet commitments. Regular review of cost-sharing status identifies shortfalls early when you can take corrective action. Discovering at project end that you fell short of match commitments is too late to fix the problem. Let us summarize the key points from this lesson on cost sharing. Cost sharing creates binding commitments to contribute resources beyond what the federal award provides. Once you commit to match in your proposal and receive an award, you must deliver on those commitments. Failing to meet cost-sharing obligations creates serious compliance problems, including potential repayment requirements. The type of cost-sharing matters. Mandatory match is required by the program and applies to all awardees. Voluntary committed match is not required but becomes binding once offered in your proposal. Voluntary uncommitted contributions do not create binding obligations. Understanding these distinctions helps you make appropriate decisions about what to commit. Overmatching creates risks that organizations often underestimate. Generous match commitments create documentation burden throughout the project and compliance risk if you cannot meet them. Federal policy discourages voluntary committed cost sharing, and organizations should carefully consider whether offering match truly serves their interests. In our next lesson, we focus specifically on valuation of in-kind contributions. Donated time, space, goods, and services must be valued according to federal standards. Proper valuation ensures your in-kind match counts and withstands audit scrutiny. Practice exercise. Review a funding opportunity announcement for a program you might apply to. Does it require cost sharing? If so, what percentage or ratio, if not, would you consider offering voluntary match and why or why not?